with diagnosis, and that's not even to say that those diagnoses are accurate. I don't even believe they are, but that's just to show that there's once again a disproportionate impact in the event that misdiagnoses are going on. And if that is the case, that just makes it all the more reason to not be focusing on things like guns when it's pharmaceuticals, which could be misdiagnosis towards a specific demographic. Yeah, you're good. There it is. This is the one you're talking about. So this is basically child hospitalizations rise bipolar disorder. This was diagnosis for bipolar disorder and from 1996 to 2004. Now, to start this out, my claim is that shootings in general, the mass shootings, spectacle shootings in inner cities, all of it, there's a property there with pharmaceuticals that isn't being discussed. And I think that you can see where how you can find those segments of society, be it spectacle shootings by white teenage kids who are on the same drugs that that certain inner cities are that have a lot of shootings as well. And you can see where these child hospitalizations disorder leading up to 2004 increased. And as we were just talking about, and well, and the spike on the demographics by race is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. And what it screams to me is that the diagnosis, it's not an intentional thing in my opinion. It's where the doctors have a knee-jerk perspective to go directly to something like manic or bipolar, prescribe an SSRI stimulant, something along those lines. And effectively what's happening is, as when you have for example, government mandated health programs, so you have more in the concentrated inner city area, you're going to find more misdiagnoses through that system. So that to me may be the explanation. Yeah. Well, and even more than any race component of it, when you look at the data on it, what you see is, here we go. So void of race, you have benzodiazepines with opioids. Look at the overdose increase that's going on there. If you can see on the screen, you see a spike going on. This is in the United States. It's from the National Center of Health Statistics and the CDC. What you find is, if you don't have opioids in a benzodiazepine, it stays relatively flat for overdoses. That doesn't make benzodiazepines necessarily needed to the degree they're out there, but they have so many with opioids. And when you start seeing that kind of a trend, and you start seeing like this, where you have age 12 to 19, antidepressants and stimulants are two of the top three things that age 12 to 19 are on. The other one is basically something for bronchitis or for asthma, an inhaler. So effectively what you have is age 12 to 19, any kind of processing centers being shut down when it comes to processing through mental complex thinking of stress, of managing anxiety, of being able to focus on one thing or two things, and at the same time without being pulled in too many directions or being able to be unproductive. So you instead of learning the critical thinking skills, they just give these kids all of the. This is one that really knocks your socks. Right. So exactly, it breaks the adaptation. So no longer is there an adaptation going on. Now what's happening is at the moment where a person may grow. So we'll use an analogy, for example, if you ever used a weight room, you know that when you lift weights, you're going to have a moment where your muscles get weaker, they break down before they grow. The same thing happens mentally in your brain when you're going through stressful situations. It's the processing of those stresses, it's the lifting of those stresses and getting beyond those stresses that helps you to train and strengthen that muscle the same way a bicep does. So when you basically take that moment where resistance is coming and to remove the resistance, all you do is you just leave the muscle there weak. And the moment that medicine no longer can help that muscle mask it, the brain doesn't know how to cope with a stressful situation. And typically what's happening is between 13 to 27 is when you see that happen, is when 13 to 27 on these kids who have been prescribed all this shit for the last 15, 20 years. That's when you see where 17 school shooting. So while we have a decrease in overall homicides through gunfire, we have an increase in spectacle shootings. Exactly. Beyond anything that could be described in a gun. So check this out. So this is all SSRIs. These are antidepressants. This is from 1992 to 2003. Look at that increase. This is in America. Now as we keep going back, this is from 2005, 2010. Any male, any female in the past month, and this was during this specific survey, who had been on one of these psychotropic, ADHD, etc. So you've got a large relative population. Now this is interesting. Let me scroll this down a little bit here so everyone can see it. Here we go. So trends in antidepressants among 12 and over. This is age 12 and over right here. So look at that. From 1999 to 2002, we're talking less than 15 years in total. By the time 2014 happens, you've got a 5% increase in antidepressants. I'm sorry, you want me to give a gun while you have people becoming... Look, the purpose of getting better pharmacology is to have less depressed people. Why are we seeing such an increase in antidepressants if the goal of pharmacology is to reduce that? And then as you see, these are any opioid at all, 2000, 2015. Look at this spike. Exactly. And as we keep going back, it gets worse. So homicide, suicide, and firearm-related death, age 15 to 19. So suicide, firearm related, and homicides. So as you can see here, homicide, look at this, is actually the lowest percentage-wise between firearm-related, so that'd be accidental suicide or homicide. Homicide, gunfire between 15 and 19 is the lowest percentage-wise. So the reason, again, you want to look at the pharmacology part is you have a decrease in overall gun violence happening at the same time increases in suicides and gun violence for age 13 to 27 is happening. So that would indicate it's something that it's not a gun. It's something that couldn't be seen. Now look at this. From 2001, 2011, this is 10 years. Look at the opioid increase for treatment. More than fivefold in 10 years. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you've got different kinds of medications. Now, a couple of these medications here have since been removed from the market. Now, these are the chemicals that go in to create the SSRIs, but some of these chemicals have been removed from market since that time period. We'll just keep going. Oh, nope, we're not going to do that. So we're out of those pictures. I need to pull up my OneDrive here. There it is. Okay, give me 1 minute. So basically, here, ask me a few questions on it while I'm getting these other pictures pulled up here. I'm not seeing any comments. So, hey, can they hear? Who can they hear? Can they hear anyone? Shoot. Oh, I think I might know why. Let's give this a shot here. I'm going to turn my microphone on to the computer microphone. Hold on. Okay. All right. See if they can hear you now.
You guys hear me okay?
One more time. Can they hear us okay?
All right, let's see. Jeremiah, can you hear me better now? Hello. David and I haven't practiced with this much, so any feedback would be beautiful. Hello. All right. Well, I will make sure I get my face.
It just said, "Hey, they can hear you now." Okay, so let's hop right back in it. All right. Now this was as of 2013 when you took all of the combined, and I broke it down to the type. But when you're talking anti-anxiety, antipsychotics, antidepressants, ADHD, and look at this, I found this remarkable. 274,804 between the age of 0 to 1.
Yeah, that's crazy. How do you even diagnose a kid that age? It's outrageous.
It's remarkable to think that was a feasible diagnosis by someone at that age to apply to an infant. But regardless, 8.38 million.
There's a million kids below 5. I've heard that ADHD can't even be diagnosed before 6.
Yeah.
There's a million kids on these things.
Yeah.
There's only 20 million kids in the U.S. ballpark. So 8 million kids on psychotropic drugs. That's a third of the freaking nation.
Exactly.
Holy crap.
Yeah. And when we go down here, let me try to pull up. There's some specific ones that always jumped out the most to me. Total U.S. drug deaths. Okay. So here's a good chart here. So these are the drug overdoses and the increase from 1999 to 16. I mean, when you're looking at these type of numbers, right? And then you see numbers. I wonder if I can get the gun stats up real quick.
It's just about tripled.
Yeah, I have some gun stats here also. Here we go. Let's see if I can get the FBI stats. I don't know if I have the FBI stats on this one. Basically, what we have is a decrease. Despite an increase in population, we have a raw number decrease from 1995 to 2015.
For violent deaths?
For gun homicide deaths. So
Stephen Pinker pointed that out years ago. Like we're in this long trend of decreasing violence, decreasing oppression across the board in all sorts of countries and all over the place. And yet this trend is completely the other way. Like there's something completely fucked up going on here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let me see here. Where was I? So prescriptions, gun ban, prescription. There we go. All right. So when you keep going, let me just try to find another good one that we could dive into here. Break down. Oh, there we go. So,
curiosity, while you're looking for this stuff, how long have you been digging up these details of this kind of thing?
So, I mean, I've been in a couple of debates on this over the last 2 years. Man, without distracting myself with looking at pictures, I can break it down very, very quickly like this. What you have is instead of doctors prescribing things like, short-term, maybe SSRIs, but to go along with that, methodologies like a handful of almonds for serotonin and for to be able to release serotonin at certain times. It stores it and allows you to have that come over to reduce anxiety at moments. Instead of that, or 60-second walking remedies, or all of these other methods that could be used in conjunction or in replacement of. The first method is to prescribe these drugs, and what they do for a child in a developing brain is there's these receptors that are going on. Everything's clicking, and it creates a synthetic or fake dopamine release. And so that dopamine release.
Hold on a second. Now Jeremiah Boyd's he's commenting here. He's pointing out how he's seen the same thing in the military. People can't handle stress. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Precisely.
Interfering with people's ability to develop the skills to cope with the things, to deal with those stressors, as opposed to just like making your brain forget.
The intent of benzodiazepines and SSRIs were to be short-term bridges to help people cope with short-term extreme stresses. The military is a great example, because for something like coming home or suffering from PTSD, that's supposed to be a short-term benzodiazepine, 12 to 18 months at the absolute maximum, going along with other mental training exercises, physical training exercises, to have natural dopamine releases, to have natural stress management skills. None of those materialize. If your brain, see, the thing is, you can even operate those skills. So you can find those coping mechanisms with these drugs in your system, but because your receptor is being blocked off.
It's so uphill. You and I talked about this before with the energy situation. Our brain is a stochastic evolutionary process. Learning is an evolutionary process. And one of those pieces of that process is that shit always tries to find the easy path.
Yeah. So exactly. And so basically, if you're able to do it, so like, even if you're able to do it while you're on the drug, your brain doesn't retain the capacity to do it off the drug because you've turned off your receptor to manage the stress. So
when you talk about what's your brain doing here, your brain is carrying on despite the stress, whereas the proper healthy pattern is to do something, change something in your life to fix the stress.
Yeah, great examples. So it's interesting to me that the medical community itself, and it's so, when it comes to something like a vaccine, the whole principle of that is a small amount. When it comes to something like the flu vaccine, a small amount to prepare you so that you don't get overwhelmed by the larger amount. Well, if that's the principle for vaccines, I find it so interesting why the pharmaceutical community chooses to cut off the receptors for any kind of emotional processing centers. And
no, hold on, no, that might be what we talked about before about like twisted incentives. Very often, the medical staff, their incentive comes from the place of wanting to ease the suffering of their patients.
Well, no, I understand why they do it. No doubt about that. I'm more or less referencing, like, from a philosophical perspective at the core level. I can't believe that people don't see that inconsistency. You know what I mean? To where we recognize on a physical property level the need to have physical injections, but we don't comprehend on the mental perceptional level the same thing. But that's just, again, something that can be corrected. And like you said, critical error. It's nothing malicious, but it is something that needs to be discussed when the trends are found. You know what I mean?
And let's briefly talk about that. You and I talked before about finding someone in the medical community that can, because this research that I saw that you were going through your folders. You got dozens and dozens and dozens of these things. You've obviously researched the shit out of this.
Yeah, man. I've had to do not debates, but I put some shit together on this. Yeah, this is something a big one for me.
So you and I talked before about putting together something scientific, and to do that, you and I will have to talk about statistics and correlations, and then we'll have something to bring to someone who might put this into a medical journal. Let's talk this time about the other side of this. There's a lot of folks out there, anti-vaxxer types, they're pretty passionate. If you get the right ear, if you get the right person to look at this information, there's a lot of folks that are going to jump in there and they're going to really want to see this change. Like, I think there's an angle on the political side and a way to put together a picture to help other people realize, I should think twice about giving my 4-year-old a fun.
Yeah, well, so there's always, and I like to use this one for a kid because this one's a really simple one. There's always a remedy that can be tried first that doesn't involve a pill. The doctor, unfortunately, these days are not giving that remedy first. So if your child or struggles with focusing in the classroom, for example, I struggled with that. I struggle with that in terms of just focus to this day. A handful of almonds. So in other words, putting like 3 bags of just a serving of almonds separate and maybe giving it to a teacher, let them know. That helps to store up serotonin levels, release certain shots of dopamine releases at moments when you feel more stress. That's one easy remedy you can do. There's so many remedies that can be had out there that community would, I believe, jump into it for good cause. Those are the things that aren't talked about first. That means there's 7-year-olds that could eat a handful of almonds and take a 60-second walk in the morning to set themselves in a mental state. But instead of being prescribed that, they're prescribed a lifelong benzodiazepine or stimulant.
We talked before about the incentives of the medical staff, and I've seen this kind of thing in different places at so many levels. It's pretty easy for a doctor to get sort of cynical about how I make this prescription, I give them this advice, they just fucking blow me off, right?
Yeah.
The doctor can give this awesome advice, and that the folks or the kids don't actually follow through. It doesn't really help. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of doctors kind of take this cynical fallback position. You know what? At least if they take the antidepressant, he can get his grades, and he doesn't fight at home all the time.
Yeah, so this is the path of least resistance, right? I mean, and this is an issue that also goes along with beyond just a drug, maybe society at some point. But you're absolutely right. Oh well, he's getting the grades. And that's where we've kind of gotten away from the fact that sometimes the fail short term is a long term win. And so it's like, okay, if he gets the grades, what's the long term cost? He's now taking this medication. If it works out for his life or her life, that's great. But the likelihood of that happening with what we're seeing is not likely. The stronger likelihood in that scenario is that they're going to have some kind of a mental or emotional break at some point that occurs. And it will likely lead to some kind of professional or personal issue that can be on a ranging spectrum of spectacle shooting or suicide all the way down to, depression.
They're ridiculous tragedy.
Yeah.
From 1.5 to 4 in 8 years. That's a factor. That's almost a factor of 3. And you saw, or you remember what I mentioned to you earlier about 1998 being where I started the cutoff at. So basically 1998 is when Columbine happened. After 1998, we had school spectacle shootings at a rate of 2.5 times higher than the entire history of the United States up until 1998 on an annual basis. So that's pretty remarkable. And then we touched on this before. There might be a positive feedback loop here. People heard about Columbine, they saw this craziness in the news, and then their doctor tells them their kid has, he's depressed or whatever, and now all of a sudden they're maybe worried about that kind of outcome, and so they prescribe the drug as a prophylactic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, effectively, and sorry, I was reading one of these comments here, but yeah, I mean, prescribe. Basically, you have these new stresses happening in a society who isn't sure how to manage it with the kids, and they naturally will trust the industry, who is likely with their best of intentions. Look, science is the practice of getting things less wrong, not the practice of getting things correct. And so when you look at electroshock therapy in the not so distant history being a common medical practice, when you look at cigarettes being recommended by doctors, this is not because people are inherently corrupt, and although some may be. It's because people get information less wrong over time, not more right. And so basically you end up having a situation where we're running guinea pig tests on this series of kids right now. these are the first ones going through the pharmacology age. 1995 to 1998 is really when it started hitting marketing.
That guinea pig aspect has kind of always been like, part of the medical industry.
It really is. Absolutely. I mean, at least Kevorkian was honest about it, but you're absolutely right. That was a joke.
You're a Michigan boy, right?
What's that?
When people talk about Michigan, I mention him along with like Tim Allen and Madonna and like Styx.
Yeah.
Some of my influences, Diana Ross and James Earl Jones.
Yeah, I see Jeremiah or Boyd's comment on that percentage increase is insane. Absolutely, man. And I saw your comment earlier on the kid, and just generally speaking, kids who can't get through that stress, that attitude. I think you said it as just that I won't fail mentality, and instead the mentality of I guess I'm not worth it. Well, that's actually such a unique thing because of something like this. When you're prescribed something, you're told you are something because of the prescription.
There is that shame aspect. Did you ever see the movie The Edge with Anthony Hopkins and Michael Baldwin or Alec Baldwin?
What's that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have seen that actually. Sorry, it took me a minute. I read Jeremiah's comment there. Yeah. I have seen that.
Well, so you may remember, and this is something I learned in wilderness training. The major killer, the thing that people die of in the woods, is shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they sit there and they say, how did this happen to me? I don't deserve to be here. What did I do wrong? And instead of getting off their butts and, finding some shelter or figuring out where they are, they sit there and just feel like schmucks and die.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Jeremiah's talking about with these kids you see in the military, right? They get some negative feedback and they'll say, well, fuck, God, he's kind of right. Maybe I should fix that. They say, oh, I'm a shitty person. Maybe I shouldn't exist.
Yeah. Oh man, exactly. That's exactly the mindset. I'm a shitty person. Maybe I shouldn't exist. And that all starts at, hey, you're a distracted person. Take this pill. Yeah.
Right. You're not good enough for our situation. Let's fix your brain. Oh, my brain's not good enough for the situation.
Look at this chart here I just pulled up. So this is when we talk about the amount of guns in America compared to the rest of the world. Look at the amount of spending.
What's PPPUS? Oh, I see. The U.S. says, but which drug is this? All drugs?
Yeah.
This doesn't mean a whole lot. The U.S. is pretty rich.
No, I agree with that. My point to that is
on, who spends more on boats.
No. I agree with that, and it actually goes along with your same point here. My point to that is to say we always hear about the United States citizens having so many more guns, but we don't hear about the amount they spend on things like drugs in a similar amount more, or like you just said, boats. Of course we have more guns. Of course we have more boats. Of course we take more drugs. We also have storage units. You know why? Because we're an excessive country by nature. So with excessiveness comes more drugs, comes more guns. So why is it that you're going to use that statistic of more guns without the relationship of, oh yeah, we also buy more prescriptions. We also have more drugs. We also have more vehicles. These are the things that just happen by nature when you have the society that's thrived both globally and domestically like we have. So that was the point of bringing that one up, similar to what you said with boats. It's interesting to me how they always be, oh, America has, so many more guns than the rest of the world. Oh, no shit. It's because we've, generationally speaking, had more money than the other generations of the world for the last 200 years. 100 years. So anyway, all right, here we go. There we go. All right. So this is for not now. Oh, no, I'm going to do this one actually.
No, let's talk about the prediction that you had. And because this to me, and I learned this from William Calvin, whenever I hear a theory, everybody's like, well, what could fuck that up? like what would mess that theory up? That's how we test it. Your basic theory, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is that over-prescribing these drugs, over-diagnosing the shit that these drugs supposedly treat, and therefore over-prescribing these drugs is interfering with people's adaptive mechanisms, which means that later on, when the drugs start to lose their effectiveness with time, all of a sudden these people have a crisis situation that some of them kind of lose it and go shoot people.
No. Well, yeah, for sure. Well, and actually, I can break it down more than that. And this chart has a girls chart 0 to 17 right here. You can see where a major spike begins to occur right really about right here. But then
there's the drug prescription.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
For psychotropic drugs. Now,
hold on a second. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say one of their. And by the way, Mandy's a nurse. She might have something to say about this. But to me, what's fucked up about this chart is that giant spike of 1 and 2 year olds. What are they? How are they being diagnosed when they're freaking babies?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, I would be interested to see the data for that myself. Let's go to where we at. I want to go to something. The question you. Yeah. What will we be seeing? What predictions would we see? Sure. This one, I got to find the suicide chart one. Oh, there we go. There we go. This is it. So now the reason that prison population is so predominantly male is because you've got a spectrum. Well, just imagine that there's one spectrum of all responses, and at the most high end of that spectrum is some kind of homicide, and at the most low end is some kind of pacifist. Okay, so you'll have when it comes to the high end of the spectrum, with people who don't know how to process emotions, who have been taking these drugs, what you would find is an increase in suicide rates in that demographic for those who are on the lower end of that aggressive spectrum, and an increase in things like spectacle shootings. So outburst events in the aggressive ones. So that'd be a male and female predominantly. And what you find is a increase in female teenage suicide rate, and suicide rate for all teenagers, but a larger increase for female for girls from age 12 to 17, and the same increase for spectacle shootings or just actually violence in general for males.
Now, one of the things you described is that guys tend to be more outward or more overt when they lose their coping mechanisms, and that's where we get a lot of the spectacle shootings. And the fact is, no one ever says, I wonder if it was a chick that shot up that McDonald's. Like, it's never a chick. It's
exactly.
Right. Women are the ones who lose it and drown their children, but they don't really go out on these freaking shooting sprees, right? It wasn't a father and daughter. It was a father and son. And what you're describing here, and any chance you can go back to that last graph or the one before that?
Sure.
The suicide rates 15 to 19.
Yeah, but and real quick, this is antidepressant, and look at it's almost a double increase in that from male and female.
Yeah, I see that 14.2. It's more than double.
So they're internal. So that's where you get more of that internalization versus externalization and stimulants, like with males. But let me go back to that other chart you wanted me to go to. Where was that at?
This is something that Jeremiah just brought up. The babies that are getting the drugs when they're 1 or 2, like, are they being like? Is this like an off-label use of this medication? Are they treating these babies for something that actually isn't depression, but rather something else that also responds to?
I want to get more information on the 0 to 2 range. I'm wondering if some of that has to do with the stresses that a body faces at time of being born. That would make some sense to me. So I want to get more info on that. The reality is, by the time you get, in my viewpoint, and I don't want to speak for every situation, but on the overall situations, by the time you get to 2, you really shouldn't be able to be diagnosed for something such as ADHD.
And that graph you had showed that, like, it dropped
it did. It did. And so that we'll get more info on the 0 to 2 range for sure. Let me see here.
So there it is. The suicide rate per 100,000 among teens, that one in the upper right now. That picture, you'd mentioned how guys tend to be more overt, women tend to be more suicidal. And you just scrolled it away from your picture.
Tell me if I'm there.
The reason I'm stuck is because on that graph, you have more guys being suicidal than women.
Where you at? Which one?
It was up and to the right. It was deaths per 100,000. I'm colorblind here. I tell you the colors of the graph. Keep going. A little bit more. It's above opioid deaths. There it is. No. Keep going. Here it comes. Suicide rates per 100,000 among teens aged 15 to 19 by race and Hispanic origin and sex. 2014. It's got a red and blue bar graph. It just it's going down the right side of the screen, and now it's dropped off the bottom.
Yeah.
Although
this one here,
the voice might delay compared to the sound. It's a blue and red bar graph, or maybe purple and red.
Bar graph. Sorry.
Jeremiah suggests that the 1 to 2 might be postpartum depression treatments. That's not too crazy. That's not the one.
But that wouldn't be for the child, though, right? That would be for the mother, I would think.
Well, yeah, but like Jeremiah suggested, maybe the baby's colicky, or maybe.
Oh, true. No, completely agree. Yeah, completely. I think that there's probably some reasonable explanations for the 0 to 2 range. I want to find out more on that.
Weird anomaly, like something else is going on.
Suicide rates. Got it.
I'm sorry, what?
I got it pulled up now.
There it is. Suicide rates per 100,000. The per 100,000 is in parentheses. That's the one.
Yeah, got it pulled up. There you are.
Show trends by, there it is. That one. You described how women tend to introvert more and kill themselves. Guys tend to extrovert more and go on these spectacles. And yet, on this diagram, we've got more guys killing themselves than women.
Well, that's the increase that we would see. And so what you see is the increase. So let's go right here. So you see the increase from where they were to begin with, and not necessarily for antidepressants, to where they are now. The increase is increase in suicide rates with women compared to where they were 20 years ago in terms of that age group. So again, not the age group and where they are today, but the increase.
So that one was just for 2014.
Correct. So basically, when you look at where the rates were 20 years ago, you have an increase in both, but the increase in women in that age range is more than the men in that age range. And then the spectacle shootings across the board obviously go to the men on those situations.
Yeah,
but
I've never heard of a woman. No one.
Just that YouTube or Google shooter.
There's all these different factions. Is he a Democrat? Is he a black guy? Is he a Republican?
That's one of the core problems of the whole situation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody ever wonders if it's a girl doing it. No, nobody thinks it was a girl shooting up a freaking McDonald's.
Look at this again when you look at things like the 12 to 19 range here on this chart. Again, 6.1% stimulants, 4.8% antidepressants. And that's where I say, like, you're talking about kids who at that point in these charts have already been on drugs before they hit that age 12 typically. So effectively, by this, I would call that the guinea pig range from 12 to 19. How is this entity going to respond? And that's what we've been experiencing for the last, I would say, 15 to 18 years, is how are these entities that have been drugged from 5 to 7 years old going to respond to stresses in the world? This is a failing metric by any guinea pig test. We've had decreases in violence across the board, but in this age range,
your numbers aren't like it's a 20% increase. It could be, you got a factor of 3 increase across 10 years. It's outrageous.
Yeah, with everything from antidepressant, and then this is a joke I made with you earlier, as you know. You want me to give up my guns when you're telling me that we need to keep prescribing all of these people antidepressants and stimulants? So we're going to have a bunch of you're telling me that we are such a depressed country that is also being fed stimulants to this degree, and you should take my guns? That's absurd. And the antidepressants we're giving the depressed people aren't working, even if I trust all of your presumptions that
it's beyond not working. What you're describing is that it's actually maladaptive and creating more problems.
Well, yeah, and it's maladaptive. So where you would have adaptation in the brain, you don't have that. You have the opposite of that. And then, as you talked about, it's incentivizing that kind of behavior to continue. So, in other words, there's a school shooting. Oh no! Now we have all of these kids going to the doctor.
I'm more worried about it. I gotta get on it, man. I can't.
So the kid. So let's just go through Yeah, when we go through a hypothetical situation, let's say that a middle school gets shot up, right? Middle school gets shot up. Let's say that 50% of that school goes and sees a doctor because their parent wants them to, or a therapist of some kind. And let's say that 50% of that 50%, so now we're at 25% of the school has been prescribed something to deal with that. Now let's say 50% of that 50% never gets off of that. That's 12.5% of that school that has been put on this kind of a program for the rest of their life because of the exact thing they're saying, because of the school shooting that likely was caused because that person was on these things that they're now on for the rest of their life. So it's having that reverse property issue from start to finish. It's incentivizing prescriptions for the same behavior that the prescriptions are kind of playing an indirect role in causing.
All right, so to me, and you have a vast amount of data. Like, it's one thing if you find a couple studies that sort of back up a theory. It's another thing if you got 50 operating patterns from lots of different places. Like, this is something that Oliver Wendell Holmes talked about. We don't need to investigate this obscure, weird possibility like ET. We need to accept and face the obvious patterns that are right there, and this seems like one of them. And so
when I break it down from 1995 to 2015, here's the reality: we gained 55 million people, raw number. We reduced raw gun homicides by 2,000 between those two numbers, 1995 and 2015. That's the reality. So with 55 million more people, we had 2,000 almost less gun homicides in those 2 years. So the guns there clearly aren't causing the issue. You have less than 1,000 between shotguns, between rifles, and between other guns. You have less than 1,000 compared to 1,500 knife murders.
Forgive me, Manny just showed up. Will you show the correlation between the use of these drugs and the increase in these spectacle shootings?
Sure. Let me see here. Well, man, shit. I got to find my data on the shooting. Since 1998, we've had a 2.5% increase, or 2.5 times, I would say percent, 2.5 times increase in spectacle shooting. So basically, since Columbine, there's been 2.5 times the spike in shootings. Hold on. Like for what I call spectacle shootings. It's basically what everyone else calls. Let's see here. See, this stuff is so scattered. I don't even know where half of my. Do you know where it does? Look at this. See, as you can see, you have.
If you sit down and write a paper, that'll be half the value is that you get your head 100% straight.
Well, just get the chart for this one all the way in order. I can cite it. It's 2.5 times the increase in school shootings for ages 0 to 17. You have an increase of 2.5 times from 1998 to 2015. That was the number from every year before leading up to 1998. So if you took every year leading up to 1998 and averaged that out, and then you took all of the years from 1998 on, it went up 2.5 times when you took 98 to 2015. As you can see, I have
the main correlation is the increase in the use of these drugs and an outrageous increase. You were showing factors of 4 in the use of these drugs. And then the other crazy increase is the increase in shootings at the same time, despite the decrease.
That's the big thing. So you have
violent deaths and violent attacks.
You have teenage violence staying at either a stagnant level or increasing for spectacle shootings, or just ages basically 12 to 26. But mainly in that, let's just keep it 12 to 17. You have increases happening right there in that age demographic, despite society overall having decreases in terms of gun homicides over a 20-year period. So you have an increase happening here with a decrease happening there. Why is that? And an overall decrease happening on top of that. I always say, if you were to have the exact same amount of shootings occur and only have an increase in spectacle shootings, you would have an increase of murder victims. The fact that we decreased murder victims in a raw number form, despite an increase in spectacle shootings, says how out of balance this is in relationship to society. Society has such a decrease happening that it can absorb an increase in spectacle shootings and still decrease it. That's pretty crazy when you think about it. Because if everything stays the same, you just have more spectacle shootings, you have more gun death. The fact that you have less says that this demographic is where it's really the trouble is where the trouble is happening, and then you have to figure out why.
It's not just a correlation among these major trends. It's a correlation among fairly specific demographics and fairly specific time frames.
Yeah, no, everything's 95 to 98. You see this. It's almost, you could almost call it a big bang of pharmaceutical. You have a 95 to 98 slow burn, and then after 98, 99, 2000, all of a sudden these things are being prescribed to from an SSRI to stimulant, et cetera, across the board on a major level. And basically, and it's for the first time being prescribed, and this was one of the first charts we showed up to kids.
So let me describe something. This is going to feel unrelated. It's going to feel like a tangent, but it's not. And Mandy can back me up on this. About 15 years ago, we started seeing, maybe 20 years ago, we started seeing these antibacterial hand sanitizers showing up everywhere. And in the last 2 years or so, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, said these are not appropriate for anyone but medical personnel. The hospitals used to have them fucking everywhere, just in the hallways. Hey, don't forget, everybody, you should do this to your hands when you walk in the door. They've thrown that all away now because the overuse of these things has created all the fucking superbugs. Like if you're a nurse or a doctor, yeah, we want you to sanitize your hands because you're into everybody's body. It's critical for you to sanitize your hands. But for just a little kid playing at the playground, no, you're not supposed to sanitize your hands, because doing so, throwing down that alcohol on those germs kills most of the germs. It kills 99.9% of germs. And the 0.1% are the ones that are the future superbugs. And the medical industry, and this is the point, the medical industry changed their story. They said, hey, wait a second, this shit is actually working against us. The natural immunities that regular schmoes have come in the door, that's fine for what they deal with in the hospital. The doctors and the nurses that are into everybody's cracks, yeah, we gotta put the stuff on their hands to make sure they're not going to transfer as much, and that's the side effect of being in the medical industry. But it shouldn't be used for everybody because of these massive side effects. So the medical industry, the medical community, theoretically, if they become informed, that should create a bit of a change.
Yeah, you would hope so. I mean, theoretically it would, but again, if I could get the lobbyist charts that I sent you up, I'm not going to be able to do that while we're on here. But so check this out. It's just pulling up off of Google Images because I don't have all of my folders with me at this point. But so as you 15 to 29, look at this spike here. These are young people ages 15 to 29 made up a large share of gun-related deaths in 2016. So you see this? And again, I just did a Steve Jobs numero uno, rule number one, never do, which is to pull a demo without going through it first. I just typed in the stats on the violence part because Mandy was asking a question. I wanted to get something pulled up because I don't have all my folders organized on this computer. But look at that for 2016. What you see is look at that spike, and then look where it goes right back down.
Yeah, so it's clearly a demographic issue, absolutely, and we're seeing the same correlation with the drug prescriptions for the kids in the same age.
That's exactly right. You see the same exact things going on.
We talked about this before. There's like a 5-year delay between the regular use of these drugs and about the time when they don't really work anymore.
Yeah.
And age 7 or like age of 7 is when people start taking the drugs. And that last graph you showed, we have kids 7 years later being the major, the beginning age of the spectacle shootings. So yeah. That's that 5-year delay we're talking about.
Look at this is really interesting. Look at the increase from 99 to 16, but look at that final number in 16, that spike for opioid deaths. I mean, again, that's another thing that's really demographic specific. The opioid crisis. Now, of course, you have people outside of that.
A factor of 4 in 18 years. That's outrageous.
Yeah. So basically, but when you put that next to the 2016 spike that happens between age 15 to 29 in gun violence, again, you can say that it could be. You have to acknowledge the issue there with the demographic. Then you have to figure out why is the issue there with the demographic. If we want to discuss a cultural issue, a video game, I don't care. But to me, there is a clear distinction when it comes to something you can validate with something being added into a biological system, added into a biochemical system. You can see a trend happening from that, and something subjective like a video game. I can play any video game, be fine.
That last graph you showed had a factor of 4 increase. Just to give you a sense of scale, the population increase worldwide over the same time frame was 40%.
Wow.
So basically the change in the
by 10
was a factor of 10 on top of the population change. So it definitely wasn't, that one right there.
Man, the opioid crisis this whole thing has to do with the pharmacology of the brain. So first of all, benzodiazepines have opioids in it on a large scale. So there's a relationship there. Secondly, when it comes to the opioid crisis, and this is another kind of pharmacology that's being prescribed. Now, the crisis itself is there from prescription. When you talk about methadone clinics, things along that nature, this goes along with the same relationship of messing with the brain chemistry of a developing brain. And let me try to pull up the one. There we go. It's right here. So as you see, benzodiazepines are oftentimes prescribed for anti-anxiety. These are things that like Xanax and Valiums, etc. These are given for that age group that we're talking about here, large scale. This is one of those increases we saw right here in this picture. So these would be the anti-anxiety range right down here. The ADHD would have some benzos involved also, and stimulants more than benzos there. But effectively what you end up having is, this is why we're also including the opioids in there.